Rain hit the windshield like gravel as Jack Whitaker's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. The wipers smacked back and forth, failing to keep up with the downpour as his truck roared down the narrow, winding back road. Headlights cut through dense fog curling off the Appalachian trees like breath from a beast. Beside him, 5-year-old Ellie was asleep, curled under Ranger's thick fur in the passenger seat. Her tiny hand gripped the dog's collar, even in sleep, trusting him more than the world. The gas light blinked red for the third time. Jack didn't notice. His mind was stuck back at the edge of the mechanic's lot, earlier that morning, when the landlord tossed his last boxes into the street. 30 days late is 30 too many, the man had said. You and your mutt and your brat can find somewhere else. Somewhere else. This road was all he had left. Jack hadn't even told Ellie where they were going. Truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Then his phone buzzed on the dashboard. A single email lit the screen. Your bid for county tax auction parcel accepted. Title in process. Coordinates enclosed. No refunds. Jack exhaled slowly. There it was. Confirmation. He was now the legal owner of a 14-acre plot with a cabin tucked somewhere in the backwoods of Preston County, West Virginia. He'd never seen it in person. The listing had 2 grainy black and white photos, one of a collapsed roof, the other of a moss-covered chimney poking through trees. But it only cost $713.17. Jack had $900 left. That left him with enough for gas jerky and 1 tank of propane. That would have to be enough to rebuild a life. His thoughts scattered when the tires hit gravel. The paved road ended, giving way to dirt, so rutted, the truck shuddered with every bounce. Ranger sat up, ears twitching. He growled low in his throat. What is it, boy? Jack asked, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No lights, no cabins, no sounds, just trees, thick and ancient, whispering secrets in the dark. Then Ellie stirred. Are we there yet? She asked, voice thick with sleep. Jack forced a smile. Almost, sweetheart. Just a little longer. They rounded a corner, and there it was. The cabin. Half swallowed by the forest, it leaned like a man too tired to stand straight. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing like rotted teeth. The porch tilted forward, 1 post snapped clean. Moss blanketed the walls. Windows were either cracked or boarded. The front door hung half open, crooked on rusted hinges. It looked abandoned for decades. Ellie blinked at it through the rain. Is that our house? Jack parked and killed the engine. The silence after the engine died was deafening. For now, he said. They got out. The moment Ranger's paws hit the mud, he froze, tail stiff, head low. He growled deeper now, not at a squirrel, not at thunder, but at the cabin. Jack followed his gaze. Nothing moved. Still, he unholstered the 9mm he kept behind the seat and scanned the tree line. Ranger stood between him and Ellie, every muscle coiled. Easy, boy. Nobody here, Jack muttered, though his gut said otherwise. He guided Ellie onto the porch. The wood creaked under their feet like old bones. He pushed the door open. The smell hit instantly, mildew, mold, and something sour like decaying wood or forgotten food. Dust swirled in their flashlight beams. Inside the cabin was 1 open room with a crumbling hearth, broken furniture, and scattered debris. A ladder led to a loft, but half the steps were missing. The wind howled through the broken windows. Rain dripped through holes in the roof. Ellie looked up. It's kind of like a treehouse. Jack swallowed. Yeah, a fixer-upper treehouse. She smiled, and he could have cried. They spent the next hour making it as livable as possible. Jack used his tarp to cover the worst leak. He swept aside glass and broken chairs. He lit the single propane lamp and spread their sleeping bags on the driest patch of floor near the hearth. Ellie fell asleep again, her arm over Ranger's chest. Jack stayed up. He sat on the porch steps smoking the last cigarette from the glove box, letting the rain tap his shoulders. His mind drifted back his last deployment, the blood, the shouting, the days when silence was more dangerous than bullets. PTSD wasn't the problem. The problem was America didn't need him anymore. Not as a soldier, not as a worker, not as a man. But Ellie did. That was the only thing that kept him from walking into the woods and disappearing for good. Inside, Ranger growled again. Jack put out the cigarette and stepped back in. The dog stood rigid in front of the hearth tail, down eyes locked on the floorboards. His nose twitched, pawing at one spot with quiet intensity. "What is it, buddy?" Jack knelt beside him. He ran his hand across the floor until he felt it. A tiny draft. He pressed his fingers to the seam between the boards. Something was under there. A loose plank. He grabbed the crowbar from his backpack and pried it open. Dust flew up. Beneath the board, wrapped in old oilcloth, was a book. Not just any book, a journal. The leather was cracked, the binding worn. Jack opened it slowly. Inside, in tight, slanted handwriting, was a name: Benjamin Pierce, Project Ashroot. Jack flipped through the pages. Maps, dates, water test results. Notes about covert dumping and Briggs Logging Co. The last entry was written in shakier ink. "If you're reading this, they haven't just threatened me. They've started following me into the woods. I don't think I'm getting out of here. But the truth is buried here. Just keep digging." Jack stared at it for a long time. Someone had lived in this cabin before. Someone who vanished without a trace. Someone who'd been on to something. He closed the journal. The wind outside howled again, louder this time. Ranger barked and moved toward the door. Jack stood. He looked at Ellie sleeping peacefully. Ranger watching the forest and the journal in his hands. This place had secrets, and he'd just dug one up. Ranger didn't sleep. He sat by the front door all night, ears twitching at every creak of the old house. Jack had barely shut his eyes before the dog growled again, low and steady, not frantic, focused, like a soldier on watch. Jack kept the gun close, though the only thing that moved in the forest were shadows and rain. By dawn, the storm had passed. A pale sun crept through holes in the ceiling, casting streaks of light across the floor. Dust floated like breath in a church. Jack stood, his spine aching from the warped floorboards. He looked down at Ellie, still curled in her sleeping bag, beside Ranger, one tiny foot peeking out. She looked peaceful. He didn't want to wake her yet. He stepped outside. The land around the cabin was overgrown, like nature had tried to erase the place. Weeds choked the path. Trees loomed close, unnaturally close, their branches bent as if leaning in to listen. Beyond the tree line, the mountains stretched like broken spines under the mist. Jack lit the propane stove and made black coffee. No cream, no sugar, just heat and bitterness, the kind that kept a man awake. The journal still sat on the porch beside him. He'd read more of it during the night, but most entries were cryptic water tests, mentions of containment failures, coordinates scribbled in margins. Whoever Benjamin Pierce was, he hadn't just been a reporter, he'd been scared and smart. Halfway through his second cup, he heard movement. Ellie stepped out in her oversized hoodie, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her boots were mismatched, one pink, one blue. Ranger followed behind her, staying close. "I had a dream," she said, yawning. There was a boy in the fireplace. Jack looked up sharply. What kind of boy? She shrugged. Just a boy. He was sad. He didn't talk. Jack kept his voice calm. Did he do anything? No. He just sat there. Then he pointed at the floor. Jack exchanged a glance with Ranger. The same floor they'd dug up the journal from. Was it a scary dream, he asked. Ellie shook her head. No. He looked like he wanted help. Jack forced a smile and ruffled her hair. Let's eat something. Inside, he broke out a can of beans and some crackers. It wasn't much, but it was warm. Ellie ate while sitting on a dusty trunk swinging her legs. Ranger kept pacing. Then a knock. 3 loud, clear raps on the side of the porch. Jack reached for his pistol and opened the door fast, quick, clean. Standing just outside the porch was a woman in her 60s wearing a brown coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and holding a woven basket. Easy, son, she said calmly. You must be the new owner. Jack lowered the gun slightly, but didn't put it away. Who are you? Name's Mabel Hawkins. I live 2 hills over. Word gets around when someone buys the Pierce place. Jack's grip tightened. You knew him, everyone around here did. He kept to himself, but he wasn't a bad man. Went missing about 20 years back. She glanced over Jack's shoulder into the cabin. He left in the middle of the night. No note? No nothing. Then the place sat empty. Jack hesitated. You ever come here before? Once. Years ago. After he vanished, the county boarded it up. Said it wasn't safe. But it was more than just the wood rotting. She paused. This place don't just feel old. It feels like it remembers things it shouldn't. Jack stared at her. The exact phrase Pierce had written in his journal. You here to warn me off? He asked. I'm here to offer pie, she replied, holding up the basket. And maybe some advice. Jack didn't want neighbors. He especially didn't want mysterious ones. But Ellie peeked from inside and smiled. Hi, she said. I'm Ellie. We live here now. Mabel's face softened. Do you? Well, I'm glad someone does. Jack reluctantly let her step inside. She placed the basket on the counter and looked around. Well, she said, hasn't changed much. Ranger circled her twice, then sat beside Ellie. You know anything about Project Ashroot? Jack asked abruptly. Mabel turned slowly. Where'd you hear that journal I found under the floor? Her eyes darkened. That was Pierce's obsession. He believed Briggs Logging Company was dumping chemicals into the water table. Said he had proof. But no one listened. Or maybe they did and told him to shut up. Jack opened the journal and flipped to one of the entries, maps, dates, references to illegal burial sites. Mabel scanned the page, then looked back at him. You're not planning to stir this back up, are you? I'm not planning anything, Jack said. But someone poisoned the well out here, and I've got a kid to protect. Mabel nodded. Then don't trust anyone in town, especially not in uniform. Jack didn't ask her to explain. He'd already seen how quick people were to look the other way when things got inconvenient. After she left, Jack walked the perimeter of the cabin. There were faint tire tracks by the tree line, too fresh to be old, too deep for casual hikers. Someone had been watching them. He went back inside and started clearing out the fireplace. If the journal had been under one plank, maybe there was more. He pried up another, then another. Ranger stood stiff near the edge of the room, barking once sharply. Jack turned. The closet door, warped and jammed shut earlier, was now slightly open. He approached slowly, opened it. Inside, nothing but an old coat hanging crookedly from a nail and a pair of muddy boots on the floor. Boots that hadn't been there yesterday. He stepped back. "You're being watched," he muttered to himself. As night fell, Jack barricaded the doors, set tripwire cans along the porch, and kept his pistol close. The journal now lay beside his sleeping bag. Ellie was already asleep, Ranger curled protectively at her side. Jack sat up the propane lamp, casting long shadows. He flipped to a fresh page in the journal and began writing notes, locations, dates. If Pierce was right, the truth was still buried out here. And if they'd tried to stop Pierce, they might come for him too. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called once. Then silence. The storm returned 3 nights later, rolling over the mountains like a living thing. The wind clawed at the cabin, howling through every broken seam. Rain hammered the roof, slipping through holes Jack hadn't patched yet. Ellie slept through it somehow, small, exhausted, her arm wrapped around Ranger. The dog twitched in his sleep, ears flicking at every creak. Jack couldn't sleep. He sat by the hearth, staring at the crack in the floor where he'd found the journal. He'd read the entire thing twice now. There were names, dates, coordinates, mentions of underground storage barrels and contaminated streams. Phrases like corruption at the top, and Briggs won't stop until every voice is gone. Benjamin Pierce hadn't been crazy. He'd been hunted. Jack shut the journal and leaned back against the cold wall. His breath misted in the air. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the atmosphere. The place felt charged like the air before a firefight. Every noise made him tighten his grip on the pistol at his side. Ranger suddenly lifted his head and gave a low growl. Jack froze. "What is it, boy?" The dog stood, muscles coiled, ears pointing toward the far wall. His hackles rose as he padded forward, nose pressed close to the boards beneath the old cabinet. The growl deepened. Jack grabbed his flashlight and crouched beside him. "Show me." He pulled the cabinet away from the wall, and something fell out from behind it. A photograph. It was water-damaged edges, curled and cracked, but the image was clear enough, a group of men in hard hats standing in front of a construction site. Briggs Logging Company 1998 was printed at the bottom. And in the corner of the photo stood Benjamin Pierce holding a camera and smiling faintly. Jack flipped it over. Scrawled in ink. They said the ground would hold. They lied. He exhaled slowly. The words felt heavy. He started tapping along the wall, listening for hollow spaces. 1, 2, 3 knocks, solid wood. The fourth gave a soft echo, hollow. He pried at the paneling with the back of a hammer until the nails gave. The wood splintered. Dust poured out. Inside was a narrow cavity filled with old newspaper clippings and an envelope sealed with tape. The first clipping was from the Preston County Herald, dated 20 years ago. Local journalist missing, Benjamin Pierce, Chapter 4. Vanished from his cabin home early Friday morning. Authorities suspect an accident in the nearby ravine. Search called off after 3 days due to unsafe conditions. The rest of the story was filler, no foul play, no suspects. A convenient ending to an inconvenient man. Jack opened the envelope. Inside were several photographs, black and white, shot on film. Barrels half buried in the woods, their surfaces leaking dark sludge into streams. Workers in unmarked trucks. And one photo of a man shaking hands with a politician he's on the steps of the courthouse. The man was Clayton Briggs. Jack stared at the image until his hands trembled. Ranger barked suddenly, startling him. Ellie sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy." "It's okay," he said, though his voice came out tight. "Just the wind." "It sounds like someone's talking," she whispered. Jack turned off his flashlight and listened. For a moment, he heard it too, a faint murmur under the storm, like a radio whispering through static. He picked up the lantern and walked to the window. The forest swayed in the wind, but beyond the tree line near the slope that led to the creek, a dim light flickered once, then again, then vanished. "Get back in your sleeping bag," he said softly. He grabbed the rifle from the corner, checked the chamber, and slipped on his jacket. Ranger followed silently. Outside, the mud sucked at his boots. The flashlight beam cut through the mist, catching on branches slick with rain. The forest was alive with noise, water dripping, trees creaking, wind wailing. "Stay close," he murmured. They moved toward the creek where the ground turned soft and uneven. The light had been here. He scanned the area and then saw footprints, 2 sets, one booted, one smaller, deeper, fresh. Ranger growled, nose to the ground. Then the sound, a splash downstream, someone running through the shallow water. Jack aimed the flashlight. A figure darted between trees, too quick to make out, only a blur of movement. "Hey!" he shouted. No answer. Just the echo of his voice swallowed by rain. He gave chase for 50 feet before Ranger barked sharply, cutting him off. The dog's instincts said, "Stop." Jack obeyed. He knew that tone. It wasn't fear, it was warning. He turned the light down. Just ahead, the earth sloped into a narrow sinkhole, half collapsed, slick with mud. Whoever had been here almost led him straight into it. Jack backed up slowly, scanning the darkness one last time before heading back to the cabin. The wind picked up behind him, a sound almost like laughter carried through the trees. When he returned, Ellie was awake and sitting on the bedroll, clutching her stuffed bear. "There was a man outside," she whispered. Jack stopped cold. "What man?" She pointed toward the window. "He was standing by the trees. He looked at me. Then he walked away." Jack's heart pounded. He locked every door, pushed furniture against the back entrance, and kept the rifle beside him until sunrise. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the fear hadn't. Mabel came by with supplies, trudging up the muddy path with her coat pulled tight. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't," Jack replied. "Someone was out there last night." She frowned. "Probably just a drifter, or one of Briggs's boys checking the land." He showed her the photograph from the wall and the envelope of evidence. Her face drained of color. "Lord above," she whispered, "you shouldn't have found these." "Why not?" "Because that's exactly what got Pierce killed." Jack stared at her. "Killed? I thought they said he disappeared." Mabel looked out toward the tree line. "Around here, that's the same thing." The silence stretched long between them. Finally, she said, "You need to lock that journal away. Pretend you never saw it. People still work for Briggs, people who do anything to keep the past buried." Jack didn't answer. He didn't trust fear. It was just another weapon people used to make you quiet. After she left, he stood at the window for a long time, watching the road wind down through the trees. Somewhere out there, someone had been standing in the rain, watching his cabin. And that someone knew exactly what was hidden in these walls. He knelt by the hearth again, running his hand along the stone. Ranger sniffed the bricks and whimpered once, pawing at a loose one. Jack pried it free. Inside the gap was a small metal box wrapped in a rotted rag. Inside that, an old cassette tape labeled Ashroot No. 3, 2004. He stared at it, thumb brushing the faded letters. Another piece of the story. Another voice lost to silence. Ranger pressed against his leg, whining softly. Jack whispered, "Sometimes silence screams the loudest." He slipped the cassette into his pocket. and looked toward the barn through the window. There were still things buried here more than the forest wanted him to find. The cassette tape was cold in Jack's hand. Dust clung to its plastic shell like it hadn't seen daylight in decades. He turned it over slowly, reading the faded words, again Ashroot number 3, 2004. The handwriting was tight, almost paranoid, a whisper from the past. The cabin didn't have electricity, but the barn Jack hadn't explored it fully. There might be something out there. A battery-powered player. A generator. Something left behind. He zipped the cassette into the inside pocket of his jacket and slung his rifle over his shoulder. Ranger padded beside him, silent and alert. The barn loomed in the morning fog, half-eaten by moss and time. Ivy strangled the sides. Its red paint had long peeled away, leaving raw gray boards that sighed in the wind. The large doors were chained shut with a rusted padlock. Jack didn't hesitate. He kicked the lock until it snapped loose with a crack and fell to the mud. The doors creaked open, revealing a darkness thicker than it should have been. Ranger snarled immediately. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered. The inside smelled of oil rot and something chemical. Tarps covered strange mounds. Broken tools lay scattered on the floor. In the back corner beneath a workbench, Jack spotted it, a small portable tape player. Military issue. Battery-powered. He brushed the dust off and opened the tape slot. Surprisingly, the battery still had juice. He inserted the cassette and pressed play. For a few seconds, just static. Then a man's voice, shaky and hoarse. "This is Benjamin Pierce, April 16th, 2004. If you found this, they probably found me first. They said the barrels were sealed safe. They lied. They buried them under the old mill road, Ashroot Site 3. The runoff started leaking months ago. I tested the creek. Mercury, benzene. The levels are off the charts. I took samples, logged coordinates, told Mercer. He said he'd help, but now he won't return my calls." Jack froze. "Mercer." The tape continued. "I heard something last night. Outside the cabin. Someone walking. No lights. I don't think it's animals. If this is the last tape I make, tell the truth. Dig where they told you not to." The tape clicked off. Jack sat there silent. The name Mercer punched a hole straight through his thoughts. Deputy Shane Mercer, the quiet one at the sheriff's office. He remembered the badge, the way Mercer had glanced at Ellie without smiling. A man carrying secrets like a loaded weapon. They didn't just hide the truth, Jack whispered. They buried it with a warning. He stood, eyes scanning the barn, and then he saw them. Barrels, not many, maybe 3 hidden under moldy tarps. He pulled one back. The barrel was dented, blackened by fire or acid rust crawling up its sides. Yellow hazard symbols still visible under grime. Cracks had formed around the rim. A thick, oily film leaked out into the dirt. The smell hit hard, metallic and rotten. Jack stumbled back, covering his nose. Ranger barked, pacing. He wanted out. Jack snapped photos on his phone. The battery was low, but the shots were clear. Labels, leaks, serial numbers. He texted them to himself and backed out of the barn. As soon as he stepped into the fresh air, he felt a headache blooming behind his eyes. Chemical. Not from panic. From exposure. He didn't waste time. He ran to the well behind the cabin, lowered the bucket, pulled it up. The water was cloudy. He dipped a finger. Slick. Not right. No smell, but it shimmered in the light. Wrong. He poured it out and ran inside. Ellie was playing with her stuffed rabbit lips chapped, her water bottle nearly empty. "Did you drink any well water?" Jack asked. She nodded. "Just a little. I was thirsty." His chest caved in. He called Mabel, voice tight. "Something's wrong. The well's contaminated. Ellie drank it. I need help. Now." Mabel didn't ask questions. "I'll get Bonnie." Within 20 minutes, Sister Bonnie arrived tall, sharp-eyed in a raincoat and muddy boots. She wasn't a nun in robes. She was a mountain healer, one of those women who treated wounds before clinics even showed up. She checked Ellie's eyes, her breathing, her gums. "No sign of fever yet," she said, "but her stomach might turn. Weakness, nausea. This stuff builds up if it doesn't flush." Jack paced. "What can I do?" Bonnie pulled a pouch of herbs from her bag. "Boil these. Ginger-activated charcoal dandelion. It's not a cure, but it helps the body fight. Keep her hydrated. No more water from that well." "I'll bring spring water," Mabel said. Jack leaned against the wall, fists clenched. They knew all this time. Bonnie glanced at the journal on the counter. "You've found pieces, but the whole story's still under dirt. You keep going, Mr. Whitaker, but watch your back. Dead men don't talk. And you're holding a voice they buried." That night, Jack stayed up again. Ranger didn't sleep. Ellie tossed and turned beside the fire. Jack read the journal again, looking for a clue, a sign, a map. And there it was. Page 47. A sketched diagram of the valley. 3 red X's. He cross-referenced it with Pierce's photos. One of the locations was the barn. The second, marked Ash Route 2, was up the ridge. The third, Ash Route 3, had GPS coordinates written beside it. Jack typed them into his phone. The location pinged, just 5 miles out, east near an old bridge. He stared at the blinking dot on the map. That's where Pierce said the worst barrels were buried. That's where the creek starts. The same creek that ran through his land. Jack looked over at Ellie. Her breathing was soft now. Ranger rested one paw on her blanket like a guardian. Jack whispered, "You're not going to get away with this, Briggs." In the morning, he'd head into town. He'd find Mercer. Either the man would talk, or he'd confirm exactly what kind of threat Jack was dealing with. And if Mercer wasn't the man Jack hoped he was, then Jack would burn the whole truth out of this town himself. Jack parked on the far side of the lot behind the Preston County Sheriff's Department. It was early, barely past 7, but the cold was already climbing into his bones. The sky was pale, overcast. Rain still clung to the trees like sweat after a long chase. He didn't want anyone to see him walk in. Not yet. Inside the front lobby, the place smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. A single receptionist sat behind the glass, flipping through a magazine with zero urgency. She didn't even look up. "I'm here to speak to Deputy Mercer," Jack said. She blinked slowly. "You got an appointment?" "No." "Tell him Jack Whitaker needs 5 minutes. It's about Benjamin Pierce." That got her attention. She looked up, lips parting slightly. "Wait here." She picked up the phone and murmured something low, glancing at Jack through the glass, as if weighing him. After a moment, she nodded. "Room 3. Down the hall. He'll meet you there." Jack kept his pace steady as he walked down the corridor. His boots echoed. Room 3 was a small, windowless interrogation room, table, 2 chairs, no cameras that he could see. The kind of room that whispered secrets, then sealed them away. He sat. Kept his hands on the table. A minute later, Mercer walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. Hair uncombed, dark bags under his eyes. but his voice was steady. "Jack Whitaker," he said, closing the door behind him. "I heard you bought the Pierce property. You know I did." Mercer sat across from him, folding his hands. "So, what is it you think you found?" "I don't think," Jack said. "I know." He reached into his jacket and placed the cassette on the table. Mercer didn't touch it. "Pierce named you, said you were the last person he trusted, said you went quiet." Mercer exhaled slowly. "That was 20 years ago. And it's still leaking," Jack said. "Into my land, into my well, into my daughter." Mercer looked away. "Jesus. I found the barrels. In the barn. I found photos. Logs. Everything Pierce left behind. And I think you've been carrying the guilt of that silence for 2 decades." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Mercer leaned in. "What do you want, Jack? I want the whole story. I want to know who ordered it, who buried it, and who's still covering it up." Mercer's jaw clenched. "You think this town wants the truth? I don't care what they want. I care what's poisoning my daughter." Mercer stood and began pacing. "I was just a deputy then. I didn't know what Pierce was into. But I warned him to be careful. I told him Briggs had people watching him. Did you help him?" Mercer hesitated. "I gave him copies of maps from the county office, showed him where the trucks went at night. Then one day he just disappeared. I figured. They made sure he wouldn't talk. You think Briggs killed him? I think someone did." Jack narrowed his eyes. "And you stayed quiet. You think I didn't want to say something? I had a wife. Kids. If I had spoken up back then, you'd be visiting me in a cemetery." Jack stood. "Well, I don't have the luxury of silence anymore. Ellie's already sick." Mercer's eyes widened. She drank the water. Jack nodded once. "Bonnie's helping. But if there's more buried out there, we're not safe." Mercer sat down slowly. "Then you'll need help getting into the old mill road. That's where Ash Route 3 is." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You gonna help me dig?" "No," Mercer said quietly. "I'm going to help you expose it." He opened a drawer and pulled out a worn manila folder. "I've been holding on to this for years. Old permits, falsified soil reports, water testing falsified by Briggs's company. Everything I didn't have the guts to show anyone." Jack took it and flipped through the pages. His pulse quickened. There were signatures, company seals, receipts, documents that told a story of silence bought in bulk. Mercer met his eyes. "But once you open this door, there's no going back. Briggs is old, but his sons run half this county now. They've got money men and no reason to let the past crawl back to life." Jack said nothing for a moment. Then, "Out here, truth has a price, sometimes paid in silence, sometimes in blood." He tucked the folder under his arm and walked out. Back at the cabin, Ellie was asleep again, her skin pale but her breathing steady. Mabel sat beside her, whispering old mountain prayers. "Did he help you?" she asked when Jack entered. "He gave me what I needed." Mabel's eyes were tired. "Then you'd better hurry." Jack grabbed his gear, checked his phone, and punched in the coordinates. The path to Ash Route 3 cut through county land, an old Forest Service trail long forgotten. He left a note for Ellie, kissed her forehead, and whistled for Ranger. They drove 2 miles, then hiked the rest-thick brush, uneven ground, the scent of rot stronger the farther they went. By noon, Jack found it. A clearing near the riverbank, a collapsed shed, signs of excavation, and the faint stink of chemicals still clinging to the dirt. He began to dig. With every layer, the mud grew blacker, denser, oily. Then the shovel hit metal. He scraped back the dirt and uncovered a rusted lid sealed, stamped with hazardous symbols, just like the others. Ranger barked and stepped back. Jack looked up. The trees were too quiet. Then he heard a twig snapping behind him. He turned and saw a man. Late 30s, beard, flannel shirt, boots too clean for the trail. No markings, but something cold in his eyes. "You should have stayed in town," the man said. Jack stepped between him and the barrel. "Tell Briggs I'm done being quiet." The man tilted his head. "Briggs didn't send me." That sent a chill through Jack. "Then who?" A second figure stepped from the woods. Another man. Another gun. Jack raised his hands slowly. Ranger growled, baring teeth. "I don't want trouble," Jack said. "I just want the truth out." "Truth's dangerous," the first man said, "and some things stay buried for a reason." Jack's eyes flicked to the barrel, to his phone, to Ranger. Then he made a choice. Ranger didn't wait for Jack's command. With a snarl, the dog launched forward, jaws bared. The first man barely had time to react before Ranger's weight knocked him backward into the underbrush. His weapon flew from his hand and landed several feet away with a soft thud. Jack lunged sideways just as the second man raised his gun. The shot rang out, splintering a tree trunk, where Jack's head had been a heartbeat earlier. He dropped to his knees behind the barrel, fumbling for the shovel, anything solid. The ground was slick, sucking at his boots, but adrenaline gave him power. The second man stepped closer, face blank, breathing calm. A professional, not a thug, something colder. Jack grabbed the shovel and swung it upward, catching the man's wrist. The gun discharged again into the dirt, and then Jack rammed the handle into his stomach. The man staggered. Jack didn't stop. He drove his shoulder into him, knocking him backward, and pounced before he could recover. Behind them, Ranger growled savagely, still pinning the first attacker, who now whimpered beneath the dog's weight, bleeding from the forearm. Jack knelt on the second man's chest, pressed the shovel's edge to his throat. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer, just stared. "Was it Briggs?" The man gave a small, tight smile. "You really think Briggs runs this?" Jack narrowed his eyes. "Then who?" The man spat blood. "Doesn't matter. You've already signed your death warrant." Jack slammed the shovel's blade into the mud beside the man's head and stood. He motioned to Ranger. "Off." The dog reluctantly backed away. The first man tried to sit up, clutching his torn arm. "Leave," Jack said. "Tell whoever sent you this ends now. You touch my daughter again, I won't call off the dog next time." Neither of them replied, but they crawled away, slowly vanishing into the woods like wounded animals. Jack stood alone in the clearing, breathing hard. Some truths don't need time, they need teeth. He stared at the half-uncovered barrel. The earth around it reeked of toxins. The water nearby shimmered faintly like oil. He took more photos, used a pocket knife to etch part of the serial number into a scrap of wood. He couldn't carry the barrel, but he could carry the evidence. As he packed his gear, a wave of dizziness hit. The exposure was getting worse. He needed clean air, and Ellie needed real help. He started the hike back, Ranger alert beside him. By the time he reached the truck, Jack's phone buzzed. A text from Mabel. "Come home. It's Ellie. She's worse." Jack's stomach dropped. The drive back was a blur of winding roads and barely contained panic. When he skidded to a stop in front of the cabin, Sister Bonnie was already there, standing on the porch, with a wet rag in her hand. Her face was grave. She started vomiting around noon, Bonnie said. Fever's climbing. The herbs helped at first, but now it's spreading. Jack rushed inside. Ellie lay bundled in blankets by the fire, cheeks flushed, skin clammy. She opened her eyes as he approached, but they were glassy. "Daddy," she mumbled. "I'm here, sweetheart." He pressed his hand to her forehead. It was burning. "I called a friend," Bonnie said softly. "Dr. Reynolds. Retired, but he still treats locals when they can't go into town. He's coming." Jack nodded, fighting back the panic swelling in his throat. "Thank you." Bonnie placed a hand on his shoulder. "You need to go public, Jack. Now, before they come back." "I will. I've got enough to blow this thing wide open, but I need a secure way to do it." She handed him a card. "There's a man in Charleston, Marcus Riley, ex-FBI. Now he runs a private watchdog group, environmental justice cases. He helped shut down a fracking cover-up in Kentucky last year." Jack took the card. "You think he'll believe me? He'll believe the proof. And I think you've got plenty." Later that night, as Ellie rested fitfully, Jack uploaded every photo, every document, and the audio files from the tapes to a secure drive. He encrypted the folder and drafted an email to Riley with the subject line, "Urgent, Ashroot cover-up." Before he hit send, he looked out the window. The forest was still, but Jack didn't trust it. He sent the email. The reply came within the hour. From Marcus Riley. Subject Urgent, Ashroot cover-up. "Jack, this is big. Bigger than you know. I've heard whispers about Briggs for years. Never had proof. Until now. I'm coming to Preston County. I'll be there in 48 hours. Keep everything safe, and keep your head down." Riley Jack closed the laptop and exhaled. He was no longer alone. The next morning, Dr. Reynolds arrived, an older man with thick hands and kind eyes. He examined Ellie, took blood samples, and confirmed what Jack feared. Mercury exposure. Minor now, but it's in her system. Continued exposure could mean kidney or neurological issues. "She's getting out of here," Jack said immediately. "We'll go to Charleston, stay with friends, anywhere with clean water." Dr. Reynolds nodded. "Good plan. But you've started something here. People are watching. If I were you, I'd assume your phone's tapped, your roads watched, and your face is known." Jack looked to Ranger, then back at the doctor. "They came yesterday. 2 men, armed, tried to scare me off." Reynolds didn't even blink. "Then you've scared them. That's something." As the doctor left, Jack made another decision. He wasn't waiting for Riley. He'd meet him halfway. There was a motel just outside Charleston, halfway between Preston County and the capital. Quiet. Off the radar. He'd leave that night. He packed only what mattered: the tapes, the journal, the flash drive, and his daughter. He wrapped Ellie in blankets and settled her in the back seat. Ranger sat beside her, unmoving eyes scanning the road. Jack turned the ignition. As he pulled away from the cabin, a black SUV turned slowly onto the main road behind him. No headlights. No license plate. They were being followed. Jack gripped the wheel, voice steady even as his pulse jumped. "This ends on my terms." The road twisted like a serpent through the foothills, shadows thickening as dusk settled over the mountains. Jack kept one eye on the mirror and the other on the curves ahead. The black SUV was still behind him, never gaining, never falling back, just there. A specter in the rear view. Ranger growled low in the back seat, sensing the tension. Ellie slept with her head resting on a folded jacket, cheeks flushed with fever. Jack could see the rise and fall of her chest, steady but shallow. He'd taken the old logging road out of Preston, hoping the switchbacks and rough terrain would give him a head start. No such luck. At the fork near Miller's Gap, he took a hard left tires, crunching gravel, and punched the accelerator. The SUV followed. "You can offer a man money, or you can threaten what he loves," Jack muttered. "Either way, you'd better be ready for what comes next." They wanted to scare him, or they wanted to silence him. Maybe both. But Jack had already made peace with the first option, and he was too angry for the second. Up ahead, he saw what he needed. An abandoned ranger station, half-collapsed roof, weeds crawling up the porch, a rusted truck in the side lot. He slammed on the brakes and turned sharply, cutting the headlights as he pulled behind the building out of sight. The SUV didn't stop. It coasted down the road for another 100 feet, brake lights flashing faintly, as if confused. Jack waited. Engine off, breath shallow. The SUV finally backed up, slow, deliberate. Then it pulled into the clearing. Jack stepped out, rifle in hand. "Stay with her," he told Ranger. "You know what to do." The dog whined but obeyed. Jack stepped into the open, silhouetted by the dying light. He didn't point the rifle yet, but he didn't lower it either. The SUV door opened. A man stepped out. Not one of the two from the woods. This one was older, well-dressed. No gun in his hand, but his confidence was its own kind of weapon. "Mr. Whitaker," the man said smoothly. "No need for dramatics. I just want to talk." Jack didn't move. "Then talk." "I represent a group with interests in maintaining the integrity of certain records, the kind your little adventure has stirred up." "You mean the poisoned water, the buried barrels, the dead reporter?" The man offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I mean history. Not everything buried needs to be exhumed. Sometimes, Mr. Whitaker, truth causes more damage than the lie ever did." Jack stepped closer. Ellie drank that truth. The man's expression faltered. "You can walk away," he said. "We'll make sure the land is cleaned. Quietly. You'll get a settlement. Enough to leave. Enough to start over. Somewhere far." "And if I don't," the man's voice cooled, "then your daughter becomes the next headline. Veteran father loses custody after unstable behavior. Maybe someone finds meth in your truck. Or worse." Jack laughed once. Short, dry. "You really think that'll stop me, no?" the man admitted. "But it'll slow you down." Jack looked past him into the trees. Another figure. Watching. Then he looked down at the man's polished shoes. City shoes. Wrong for this terrain. "You don't belong out here," Jack said. "No. But neither do you anymore." The man turned to leave. "Offer stands. For now." He climbed back into the SUV. Jack didn't stop him. Just watched as the vehicle disappeared into the twilight. Back inside the truck, Ellie stirred. "Where are we still safe?" Jack said, stroking her hair. "Almost there." They drove another hour before stopping at a roadside diner outside Ripley. Jack pulled behind the building, using the alley's shadows to hide the truck. He slipped inside the diner with his hat pulled low, ordered 2 coffees and some soup, and paid in cash. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, handed over the takeout quietly. "Your little girl okay?" she asked, noting the concern etched across his face. "Just tired," Jack said. "We're traveling." She nodded, but didn't pry. Back on the road, Jack finally reached the motel. Riley had chosen a run-down roadside place with flickering neon and a parking lot full of truckers. Room 16, back corner. One way in, one way out. Riley was already inside, laptop open, papers spread across the table. He looked up as Jack entered. "You weren't followed," Jack nodded. "I was, but I lost them. For now." Riley gestured to the chair. "Let's get to work." They went through everything: Pierce's journal, the photos, the cassette, the satellite maps Jack had marked with Bonnie and Mabel. Riley listened, asked sharp questions, and nodded often. "This is big," he said at last. "Corporate crime, environmental violations, suppressed investigations, missing persons, hell, even a corrupt sheriff's office. It's more than enough. So what now? We go public. Tomorrow. I've got a friend at WXR News. We do a live interview. We upload the files to multiple databases. If they try to shut one down, another copies it. By the time they realize what hit them, the truth will already be everywhere." Jack nodded. "Good." Riley looked toward the back room where Ellie slept. "She's the reason, huh? She's everything." Riley leaned forward. "You ready to make this war public?" "I'm past ready," Jack said. "I just need your word you'll protect her if something happens to me." Riley hesitated, then extended his hand. "You have my word." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He sat outside the motel room, rifle across his lap, watching the shadows stretch across the parking lot. He knew what was coming. They weren't going to let him talk without a fight, but he didn't care anymore. They'd threatened the one thing he couldn't live without. And that was a mistake. Rain came down in sheets by morning, beating against the motel windows like a warning. Jack stood by the door, watching the puddles grow in the parking lot. Each drop drummed like a countdown. Somewhere out there, men were waiting, watching, and he knew it wouldn't stay quiet much longer. Inside, Riley sat at the motel desk, fingers dancing across his keyboard. His face was tight with focus. Files were uploading. Backups were duplicating to remote servers. Insurance. Redundancy. Paranoia in the best way. Jack checked on Ellie again. She was still asleep, color returning to her cheeks, a light sheen of sweat on her forehead. Fever breaking. He exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Riley closed the laptop with a soft click. "It's done. The files are encrypted, time-stamped, and scheduled for distribution. All we have to do is show up and talk." WXR's producer confirmed it, live segment at 6 p.m. Jack nodded. "We make it that long." Riley looked at him carefully. "You think they'll hit before we get there? I think if you want to bury a lie, bury it deep. Because if it crawls back up, it's not coming alone." Riley cracked a slight grin. "That from Pierce's journal," Jack shook his head. "That one's mine." He turned to the window again. A black sedan rolled slowly into the lot, circled once, and parked 2 doors down. The engine stayed running. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Riley peered out. "We need to go now." They packed quickly. Ellie stirred but didn't resist when Jack lifted her gently into his arms, wrapping her tight in a blanket. Ranger followed close, always watching. They took Riley's SUV this time, plates registered to a shell company in Virginia just in case. Jack rode in the back with Ellie's shotgun and phone in his lap. Riley drove like he knew how to disappear in traffic. They cut through the back roads, avoiding interstates. No GPS, no cell signals. "We'll go through Charleston's North Loop," Riley said. "There's a studio on Kanawha Avenue. Secure. Guard on site." As they passed into the city limits, Jack's phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered without speaking. A low voice came through, one he recognized. "You still have a choice, Whitaker." Jack didn't respond. "Go on that broadcast and you paint a target on your back. Your daughter's back." Still, Jack said nothing. "Turn around. Walk away. We'll clean the site. We'll fix the water. We'll even fund her treatment. All of it disappears." Jack finally spoke. "That offer's still on the table if I name you directly on live TV." A pause. Then the line went dead. Riley looked in the mirror. That sounded like a no. They reached the studio at 5:12 p.m. It was quiet. Too quiet. A young assistant let them in through the side entrance. "Mr. Riley, Mr. Whitaker. We've got you both set up in Studio B. Green room stocked. You go on in 40. Jack nodded, holding Ellie close. She was drowsy, but aware her fingers curled gently in his shirt. Riley guided them through the maze of hallways. Jack had never liked TV sets too clean, too artificial, like being inside a lie. But this one felt different. He could feel the weight of the truth sitting just behind the cameras. They waited in the green room. Riley double-checked the documents. Jack held the cassette, the one from Pierce. The station had agreed to play a snippet, just enough to stir public attention enough to confirm everything. Jack stood by the small window overlooking the street. And that's when he saw it. Another black SUV. Same kind of tires. Same tinted windows. His gut clenched. They're here. Riley glanced up. You sure Jack didn't blink? Positive. He opened the door, peeked into the hallway, empty. He turned back to Riley. Take Ellie. Now. Get to the control room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Riley didn't argue. What about you? I'll buy you time. Riley scooped Ellie up and grabbed his laptop bag. Ranger stayed behind, growling, low teeth bared. Jack slipped out, moving fast, but quiet. The studio floor was dark, lit only by the soft glow of overhead lights. He crouched near the equipment racks, eyes scanning every corridor. Footsteps. 2 men entered through the back, unmarked coats, earbuds, sidearms under their jackets. Not cops, not crew. Professionals. They moved fast, checking doors. One of them spoke into a mic clipped to his collar. Target inside. Preparing extraction. Jack stepped behind a pillar. Waited. Watched. As one man passed, Jack swung hard with a length of metal pipe he'd grabbed off a rig. It hit with a crunch. The man dropped like dead weight. The second turned gun out. Jack rolled behind a crate. A shot rang out, glass exploded somewhere behind him. He lunged out, tackled the man low. They crashed into a lighting rig, sending sparks cascading. The gun clattered across the floor. Jack punched, hard, again. The man tried to reach for his ankle holster. Jack stomped his wrist. And then Ranger was there. He'd slipped away from Riley's side and found his way back. With a snarl, he pinned the attacker, teeth clamped on the man's coat sleeve, dragging him away from the weapon. Jack grabbed the gun. Get up, he growled. The man hesitated. I said get up. Jack dragged him to his feet and shoved him against the wall. Who sent you? The man was bleeding now, nose broken, mouth twitching, but he said nothing. Suit yourself. Jack pulled a zip tie from his pocket and bound his hands. Sirens wailed in the distance. Riley's voice came over the loudspeaker. We're live in 5. Jack looked down at the blood on his hands, the weapon at his feet, the wreckage of silence shattered around him. This was it. No more running. He walked into the studio, face hard as stone. Riley sat in the center chair, microphone clipped on laptop, open with the documents displayed. Ellie watched from the booth, her eyes wide. Safe for now. The host looked nervous. Mr. Whitaker, you ready? Jack sat beside Riley. Roll the tape. As the red light blinked on, he leaned into the mic. My name is Jack Whitaker. I'm a veteran, a father. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been uncovering something poisonous hidden in Preston County for over 2 decades. Something buried by men who thought no one would ever come looking. The clip from Pierce's tape played. The room held its breath. I have the evidence. And after today, so will you. The moment Jack's face hit the screen, it was like striking a match in a pitch-black room. Phones lit up across West Virginia. Twitter exploded. Local message boards flooded with theories, confessions, and disbelief. People from small towns who'd always whispered about Ashroot now had something concrete, something undeniable. The broadcast lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes that shook a county. Pierce's voice on the tape, trembling and raw, filled the studio. Jack's eyes never left the camera as he told the truth about the barrels, the creek, the threats, and the men who stayed in power by keeping the rest poor and sick. He spoke with a quiet fury, not polished, not rehearsed, just real. This isn't just about poisoned water, he said. It's about the poison of silence, and I won't be quiet anymore. When the feed ended, the studio erupted in controlled chaos. Phones rang off the hook. Riley was already fielding calls from news syndicates and federal contacts. The anchor looked stunned, blinking like she had just walked out of a dream. Jack stood and went straight to the booth where Ellie sat. Her eyes were wide. Not with fear, but pride. You sounded like a superhero, she whispered. Jack kissed the top of her head. Just a tired dad telling the truth. Outside, the station was surrounded. Not by enemies, by people. Locals, families, reporters, protesters. The truth had drawn them like blood in water. The sheriff's office issued a statement within the hour, calling Jack's claims under investigation. But it was too late for spin. Justice doesn't always knock on the door. Sometimes it kicks it down. By midnight, EPA officials were en route. By dawn, a team of independent journalists arrived to dig into the documents Riley released. And by the next afternoon, Sheriff Briggs made a quiet trip to the state capitol. Jack didn't go home. He knew better. He and Ellie stayed in a safe house Riley had secured. Remote clean water guarded. Just until things settled. But things weren't going to settle. They were going to erupt. Because some men weren't scared of the law, they were scared of exposure. On the third night, the safe house lights cut out. Riley sat upright on the couch, gun in hand instantly. Ranger growled low and mean. Jack moved to the window, peeking through the curtain. No movement outside. But the generators were silent. Then the pop of tires. Not one. All 4, like coordinated bursts. We're compromised, Jack said. Riley nodded. Grab the kid. We go to the fallback. They had rehearsed this, just in case. Ellie was already dressed. She knew the drill. Jack scooped her up and followed Riley out the back door into the woods. Ranger stayed close, hyper-aware. They moved through trees down a slope toward an old ranger cabin Riley had converted into a fallback point. It was only a mile away, but it felt like 50. Every rustle made Jack spin. Every owl hoot sounded like a footstep. They reached it without confrontation. But the message was clear. Whoever had silenced Pierce had just escalated. This wasn't scare tactics anymore. It was a warning shot. At sunrise, Riley called in a favor, an old contact in the DOJ, someone who owed him, someone who could push a case fast. That same afternoon, federal agents swarmed the Ash Root site. Barrels were unearthed, soil samples taken, and one more thing was found: bones. Buried shallow near the third dump point. Human remains. Male. A ring with the initials BP. Benjamin Pierce had never run away. Jack stared at the newsfeed on Riley's laptop, emotion clenched tight in his chest. "They killed him for trying to do what I just did," Jack said. Riley didn't look up. "And now the whole damn country knows." Within days, the story hit national headlines. Pressure mounted. Lawsuits began. A grand jury was convened. Sheriff Briggs was subpoenaed along with former deputies and executives tied to the Ash Root Corporation. And yet, through all of it, Jack didn't feel triumph. He felt grief. For Pierce. For the kids who drank poisoned water. For the silence that had cost them everything. But grief was fuel. And Jack wasn't finished. He gave interviews, provided affidavits, met with lawyers representing families like his who had suffered in silence. And slowly, change began to stir. But danger wasn't done with him yet. Late one night, Riley handed him a file. Inside were surveillance photos. Jack Ellie Ranger. All recent. All detailed. "Someone's still watching," Riley said. Jack stared at the photos, jaw tightening. "Let them," he said. "I'm done hiding." He stepped outside and looked up at the sky. It was clear. Stars stretched over the trees. Ellie was sleeping safely inside. Ranger lay at the porch steps, ears perked, but calm. They had kicked the door down. Now came the reckoning, and Jack would be the one to deliver it. The grand jury testimony was scheduled for Friday. Jack had 5 days. 5 days to stay alive. The U.S. Marshals offered him protection. Riley advised taking it. But Jack had a rule: don't trust the safety that comes from people who didn't bleed for it. So he opted for a tighter circle, Riley's sister Bonnie, and the dog that had never left his side. The fallback cabin became the war room. On Monday morning, a knock rattled the cabin door. Jack's hand was already on his gun when Bonnie called softly. "It's just me." He opened the door to find her soaked in rain, a folder wrapped in plastic under one arm. "I got something," she said, brushing wet hair from her face. Inside, she laid out what she had: a copy of the original Ash Root settlement from 15 years ago, documents that had been sealed under court order. But the version she had was different. It listed a hidden annex, names redacted in the official public version: Sheriff Briggs County Commissioner Roland Massey and Senator Kent Larkin. Jack stared at the page. "He's running for governor." Bonnie nodded. "And he's been using Ash Root money to fund it. Dark Pax shell donors all tied to Briggs's old network." "Then it's not just local anymore," Jack said. "It's systemic." Bonnie met his eyes. "You think they'll let this go to trial?" "No," Jack said flatly. "They'll try to bury it again. Only this time they'll bury me too." That afternoon, Riley arranged a meeting with a whistleblower from inside Ash Root, a woman named Helena Carter. She had been a logistics manager until 2 years ago, when she was quietly paid to disappear after questioning missing inventory reports tied to chemical disposal. Jack met her in an abandoned church on the edge of Mason County. High windows streaked with rain. The altar gutted long ago. Pews covered in mold. Helena sat at the back, hood pulled low. Her voice was soft but urgent. "They moved the barrels from the main Ash Root site years ago," she said. "The ones you found, those were decoys. PR fallout storage. The real toxic waste was buried deep in private land registered under shell companies, owned by Briggs and Massey. You can prove it. She nodded. I have transport records, manifests, even invoices for off-the-books shipments. Why come forward now? She looked up, her eyes hollow. Because I watched a 6-year-old boy get diagnosed with liver failure. His mother used to clean my office. I couldn't unsee it. Jack felt his chest tighten. You're not the only one carrying guilt. She handed over a flash drive. This will burn everything down, but they'll come for you harder after this. Jack looked at her. They're already coming. He got back to the cabin and loaded the drive. Helena had been telling the truth. There were scanned logs, bank transfers, blacked-out routes on trucking maps. A shadow system. Years of rot. Enough to tie a sitting senator to environmental crimes and criminal conspiracy. This is it, Riley said. This makes it federal. Jack nodded. Then we take it to the feds. The next day, Riley called a contact in the U.S. Attorney's office. They agreed to meet private secure, no press. But the meeting never happened. Riley didn't come back. By dusk, Jack was pacing. The fallback cabin was quiet. Ranger paced with him. Jack had been through too much to ignore his gut, and his gut said something was wrong. At 9:14 p.m., his burner phone buzzed. A text. No name, no signature, just coordinates. And a photo. Riley, tied to a chair, blood on his face. Jack didn't flinch. He showed the photo to Bonnie. Stay with Ellie. You're walking into a trap, she warned. I know, but it's not for me, it's to scare me into silence. I'm past fear now. He kissed Ellie's forehead before leaving. She was asleep, curled up with Ranger safe in the place he'd built to protect her. He didn't take the truck. He hiked. It took him 2 hours through the woods to reach the coordinates. A hunting shack near the edge of old mining land, boarded windows and smoke rising from a metal chimney. He approached silently, using every skill he'd learned in combat zones and raids. Through a crack in the wall, he saw Riley, still alive. Bound, gagged, bruised. A man paced in front of him, broad-shouldered, thick-necked. One of the same guys who had followed Jack days before. Jack didn't hesitate. He crept around back and slipped in through the bathroom window. His boots hit the ground silently. He moved room by room until he reached the living area. Then one sharp whistle. Ranger's signal. Jack burst in. The man turned. Too late. Jack hit him low, hard. They crashed into a table. The gun went flying. Jack didn't bother trying to grab it. He swung fists, knees, elbows, pure, controlled rage. Another man stepped out from the hallway. And that's when Ranger came. Teeth first. The fight lasted 90 seconds. When it was over, Jack stood over 2 unconscious men, heart-hammering. He cut Riley loose. You okay? Riley coughed. Been better. They say anything. Just one thing, Riley muttered. They said Larkin's cleaning house. And you're next. Jack helped him out the door. Then we take the house down before he finishes. They vanished back into the woods. No headlights, no phones, no trail. By morning, they had one plan left. Jack looked at Riley and said, Tomorrow I go in front of the grand jury. But tonight, we make sure Larkin can't hide. The rain started again just after sunset, but Jack welcomed it. Rain covered sound. Rain made it easier to move unnoticed. He crouched beside Riley in the trees overlooking Senator Kent Larkin's mountain retreat, a sprawling estate built to look rustic, but outfitted with every security measure money could buy. cameras in the trees, motion sensors buried under the gravel drive, armed guards that didn't wear uniforms but carried themselves like they had seen war. Jack had seen this kind of fortress before. Only difference was in war zones, the men inside weren't hiding from their own people. "We only need one thing," Riley whispered. Proof Larkin knew about the real barrels, the shell companies. A voice recording a document, anything that puts him in the middle. "When men build empires out of lies," Jack murmured, "sometimes you need fire to bring them down." They waited until 2:14 a.m. Then they moved. Riley hacked the perimeter sensors from a mobile rig in his backpack. Jack slipped through the blind spots he memorized from drone footage 2 nights before. They reached the rear office cabin, a separate structure from the main house where Larkin conducted off-the-record meetings. They broke in through a side window. Quiet. Clean. The office was mahogany and leather. Files locked in drawers. Computers on standby. Riley plugged in a thumb drive. "I need 10 minutes. Jack nodded, scanning the room. On the far wall was a display case of framed newspaper clippings. One caught his eye. "Local hero saves plant from bankruptcy," the headline read. A younger Larkin stood smiling beside Briggs and Massey. In the corner was a forgotten sticky note, June 14th. "Secure transfer, Walstra M. Confirm disposal." Jack took a picture. Then a noise. Boots. 2 guards doing a sweep. Riley looked up, eyes wide. Jack gestured, "I got it." He slipped out the back, hid behind the generator, waited. The guards passed, talking softly. Jack crept behind them. Close. Close enough to hear. "Boss says it all goes quiet after Friday," one muttered. "Grand jury folds, DOJ pulls back, and that vet disappears." Jack's pulse surged. So they weren't just stalling. They had a plan. The guard turned, froze. "Shh," Jack said, stepping out of the shadows. "It's already too late." The man reached for his radio. Jack was faster. He tackled him into the gravel, knocked the breath from his chest. The other guard spun, drew a baton. Ranger exploded from the tree line, a missile of muscle and teeth. He hit the second guard like a freight train. Jack bound the first with his own zip ties. Riley appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Got it," he said. "Emails, financials, even a voice memo." Larkin to Briggs. "If Whitaker won't shut up, bury him in court or in dirt. Doesn't matter which." Jack felt something cold and deep settle in his gut. Then it's all in the open now. They left the guards tied, left the office looking untouched, slipped back into the forest. By sunrise, they were back at the fallback cabin. Jack watched the mountains glow pink with morning light. It was the calm before a storm. He walked inside. Ellie was up helping Sister Bonnie pour coffee. "You look tired," she said. "I look like a man with 1 bullet left," Jack replied. "But it's the one that counts." Riley uploaded the files to 3 secure networks. The voice memo was already being packaged for the grand jury. By noon, national media outlets got the leak. Headlines screamed across websites and TV stations. By 2:00 p.m., Senator Kent Larkin was trending #1 on social media. Political analysts debated his future, while watchdog groups called for his immediate resignation. The snowball had started to roll, and it was heading downhill fast. That afternoon, Riley received a coded message from an old DOJ contact the grand jury had convened in an emergency closed-door session. The evidence was too overwhelming to delay. Jack was summoned. He sat in silence that evening, watching Ellie play quietly with Ranger. Her laughter felt like something fragile and sacred amidst the chaos around them. Sister Bonnie handed him a warm mug of tea and sat beside him. "You never asked to be a symbol," she said. "No," Jack replied, his voice rough, "but someone had to be. I had the files, the platform, and nothing left to lose." She smiled softly. "And that's why you became one." As night deepened, Jack stepped onto the porch, his mind racing. He had been hunted, lied to, nearly killed. And yet the hardest part was still ahead, testifying in the face of every machine designed to discredit men like him. But this time the machine was cracking, and he had the hammer. Riley joined him outside, watching the trees sway under moonlight. "There's no going back after tomorrow," he said quietly. "There never was." Jack replied. The two men stood in silence, the cold night wind cutting through their jackets, but not their resolve. Jack turned his gaze toward the distant horizon. They built this empire on fear and silence. It's time to burn it down, because tomorrow he'd stand before a jury of citizens and tell them everything. Everything. And once the truth was out, there would be no taking it back. Jack stood in front of the federal courthouse, flanked by two plainclothes marshals and the weight of everything he'd carried for years. It wasn't just about barrels or corruption anymore. It was about ghosts, his own, and those buried beneath lies and silence. The early morning light filtered through clouds as reporters gathered beyond the barricades, hoping for a glimpse of the man who had cracked open one of the largest environmental scandals in the state's history. He adjusted his collar, brushed a hand over his grizzled jaw, and walked inside. The grand jury room was cool and sterile. 12 citizens sat at a long table. Their eyes followed him as he took the oath and sat down. A federal prosecutor, stern but professional, welcomed him. "Mr. Whitaker, we appreciate your cooperation. Today, we ask only for the truth." "That's all I brought," Jack replied. He recounted everything: the property he purchased, the strange behavior of his dog, the buried barrels, the radiation, the fake EPA reports. Then came the names: Briggs, Massey, Larkin, the cover-ups, the threats, the deaths. He played the voice memo aloud. There was a shift in the room, a collective tension released. Even the stenographer paused for half a breath. When he finished, silence followed. "Mr. Whitaker," a juror asked, "why risk your life for this?" Jack leaned forward. "Because no one else was going to. Because I saw what happens when people stay quiet. Because a little girl in Mason County won't live past 20 because of what they buried. And because my daughter deserves to grow up in a place where truth matters." Outside, the press storm began within minutes of the sealed session ending. The leak to media had already triggered outrage. By noon, the DOJ had launched a formal criminal investigation into Larkin and his associates. Senator Larkin went on record denying involvement, but the files were already public. The voice memo was everywhere. By nightfall, Larkin resigned. 2 weeks later, Briggs and Massey were arrested in coordinated raids. More whistleblowers came forward, some emboldened by Jack's courage, others finally freed from NDAs and fear. Ashroot Corporation filed for bankruptcy. Victims across 3 counties began organizing a class action suit. And Jack Whitaker became a reluctant national symbol. He hated interviews, avoided cameras. But people came anyway: activists, reporters, veterans. They stood outside his property line like pilgrims. Sister Bonnie started calling it the Ridge of Reckoning. Jack focused on what he could control: fixing the house, planting a proper garden, spending time with Ellie, who now smiled more often and asked fewer questions about ghosts. One fall afternoon, Riley sat with Jack on the porch, sipping bourbon and watching the trees turn gold. "You changed the story," Riley said. Jack snorted. "I barely survived it." "Exactly. And because you didn't stay silent, a lot of people might. That matters. Jack looked out toward the hills. It cost a lot. The good things always do. They sat in silence for a while. Ranger lay at Jack's feet, content. The wind carried the scent of pine and fallen leaves, reminding them both how far they'd come. Later that week, Jack received a call from the EPA's newly formed Environmental Oversight Committee. They wanted to fly him to D.C., offer an award, make a speech. He declined. The work's not done, he told them. Not where I live. Instead, he met with local school boards and community groups, taught kids how to test their own water, spoke quietly at town halls about accountability, about how silence isn't safety. Ellie would sometimes sit in the back, proud and quiet. Weeks passed, then months. The media frenzy faded. The trials moved forward. Some ended in plea deals, others dragged on. Justice, as always, took its time. But progress came. The land was declared clean after months of remediation. New legislation was introduced in the state assembly called the Whitaker Act, which mandated stricter disposal protocols and whistleblower protection. Jack received hundreds of letters. One from a young man in Georgia who had discovered illegal dumping in his own county inspired by Jack's story. Another from a grandmother in West Virginia who lost her grandson to cancer linked to groundwater pollution. The last letter was from Helena Carter. It was short. Because of you, they finally cleaned the land. Thank you for not letting them forget. Jack folded the letter and tucked it into a tin box beside the porch. That spring, Ellie helped him plant sunflowers over the cleared land. Will they grow tall? She asked. As tall as truth, he said. Years later, people still drove past the property. There was no statue, no plaque, just a weathered gate and an old dog buried under a tree. But the story remained. A story of one man, one dog, and one truth that refused to stay buried. Because the ground remembers. And sometimes the only way to heal a poisoned place is to break it wide open and let the light in. And when people ask what it cost him, Jack would say, more than I planned, less than it was worth. He would glance out to the rows of sunflowers, now blooming bright in the warmth of summer, and see more than a field. He saw legacy. He saw a lesson. And most importantly, he saw that even in places corrupted by greed, truth could still take root. You just had to dig deep enough.